So I think we'll launch straight into it with the questions. Starting with Josh, if you're ready to go there. We have a question from Debs Martin. Josh, are we any closer to having aerial PAP available for cat and stoat control?
Happily, yes, I believe we are. It's not just aerial PAP. Aerial sausages are both, well, there's two different toxin in aerial sausages that are both in the pipeline. It's quite a long pipeline, so they're not registered yet, but trials are underway to get a aerial PAP bait registered, focused primarily on stoats at this stage, I believe, but hopefully also useful for cats, and then also an aerial 1080 sausages in the pipeline for cats, possibly also for stoats being brought along for the Auckland Island eradication, but may be useful for the mainland. So yeah, I think number of years to go, but it is we are getting closer.
Fantastic. And perhaps a related question then. So aerial PAP, aerial 1080 aside, we have another question from Alistair Sheet. Given the results for Kia and Fio, what are there other options going forward, I guess?
Well, yeah, we in DOC we always have this kind of tension between, like, nowhere are we just trying to conserve one species, so we're all or one kind of group of species. There's always a competition between the ones that need rat protection or possum protection or stoat protection. So if you were just trying to manage Fio and Kia, you'd time your 1080 operations for late summer of the post-mast year. So hopefully some of our operations will end up in that boat, and others may be also beneficial for Kia, but perhaps not quite as good as those ones. Everything for Kia and Fio has to happen on an enormous scale, and so that's where these aerial sausages, complementing the 1080 drops where they can't be enormous, with aerial sausages in the out years or into the country from which a reinvasion of carnivores comes, is another good option.
Great. So there's another question here from Debs, again for you, Josh. Is there even any evidence of cat bykill from 1080 rats?
There's not much evidence or not much understanding of cat secondary poisoning through our aerial 1080 ops. Secondary poisoning is a bit of a moving feast. You've got mice, you've got rats, and we're only just getting the hang of actually controlling good numbers of mice with a 1080 drop. So it's definitely a line of research that needs a bit more work. I also think just secondary poisoning of stoats needs a bit more work, and we have got research in the pipeline to get a better handle on it.
Great. So we've got a question from Cara Goddard here. She said, thanks, Jace. Started off with fabulous results and then a sad ending. Just shows how much work it takes to keep populations at good numbers. Presume there is 1080 coming soon. She says she works at the Hamilton Zoo with breed to release programs, so hopefully some of our bird relatives are still out there. So I guess, Jace, is there 1080 ops coming up to try and...
Yeah, so the some of Kahurangi's already been done this year, the cob, block, and where else? Over the other side, Operara, wasn't it?
Parapara golden cob.
Parapara golden cob.
Wongapekas
due February, March, I think next year. So things are happening. Yeah.
And then there's a question from John Innes for you, Jason. Did you actually measure stoat and cat numbers in any way through the Fio monitoring period that you described?
Yeah. So there's a network of tracking tunnels through Kahurangi, which gets run kind of periodically, I suppose. And so there is, I think Tristan's going to be able to answer that better towards the end of the day, perhaps. But there has been stoat monitoring at various times through the period of the survey, but not real consistent, I suppose.
It's very scrappy. Stoat monitoring with tracking
Mm-hmm.
tunnels is a bit problematic to start with. The surveys are more expensive. It's usually the first thing on the block when money gets tight, and that has happened in Kahurangi.
And as for cat monitoring, well, it's all pretty much anecdotal. I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Kahurangi.
Even now with the rolling out of some trail cameras, which Kristen will talk about, it's still very much a beginning. So no comprehensive cat monitoring anywhere really in any of these national predator control blocks over the years.
Very good. Joe has a question for Graham. Graham, why do you think it was just robins that were negatively impacted by the rat bounce when other rat-sensitive species like meadow and titiponamu were okay?
I think titiponamu were a bit better off. Their holes were a bit more difficult and higher and stuff, so maybe that's why. But no, I don't know why that would be. I would have thought that the meadow and the robins would have had much the same susceptibility. So I can't answer that. Yeah, do more work.
Indeed. And another question for you, Graham, from Alistair Sheet. Is there still a need to gather evidence to prove the use of aerial 1080 for rat control?
Well, yes and no. I think we know that we can kill rats with 1080, but under certain circumstances, we don't do a very good job, and sometimes the results don't last very long. So there's certainly a need to keep on investigating the relation, 1080 and how well it kills rats. I don't think we need to prove that 1080 kills rats.
Thank you. And another question for you, Graham, from Nathan Whitmore. He said, apologies if you mentioned this, but were the treatments randomly assigned?
Oh, no, I already answered that one. No, we don't. We didn't have any control over where the 1080 ops happened.
Very good. We have another one here from Robert Schweiderwinkle for Josh. It would be great to also see rat tracking rates in your graph. Did rat tracking declines correlate with care deaths like mice did?
Right, yeah, thanks, Robert. Yeah, I think I did mean to mention in that, I'm presuming you're talking about that stack of graphs showing the timing of stuff, but the rats were not a feature of that eruption in those eastern valleys. This often happens in those eastern valleys where the valley floors are quite high altitude and the winters are really cold. The rats get really squashed, and so sometimes they don't show up in an eruption at all. And in that case, there was the odd rat there, but they weren't worth showing on a chart. So it was a very mousy system at that point.
Very good. And Josh, a question from Alistair Sheet. Would you expect a comparable predator effect for kaka versus kia and fio?
Well, kaka are kind of interesting. It's an interesting comparison. The kaka, they being a normal parrot that nests in a tree and responds to mast events, unlike a kia, they nest at the start of the mast period, and they don't forage on the ground much at all. So you'd expect some differences. What's really interesting with kaka is that in the presence of moderate rodent numbers, such as Jason and his team found in South Westland, predation of nesting adult female kaka was very low. Hardly any got killed on the nest. When stoats raided the nest, they would leave the mum alone and kill the eggs and chicks. Comparably, in Nelson Lakes, the early studies of kaka nesting in Nelson Lakes, which is one of those higher altitude places where at the start of a mast event, rodent numbers are low. And in their study, they got very high predation rates of nesting adult females when the stoats were attacking the nest, indicating the same phenomenon, that a hungry stoat is more game to tackle a large pointy bird.
Very good. And maybe just one last question from Caroline for Josh, and I'm sure Jason could answer this as well. The cat footprint looked large in the photo. Do people think that feral cats are larger than domestics?
Probably.
Yeah, I think there is generally that view. I was in the field just last week doing feral cat radio tracking or live trapping for radio collaring for this sterile sausage work. And we put a 6 kilo, well, this big tomcat was off the 6 kilo scale, broke the scale. It was massive. I've never seen a cat like that unless it's a special, breed in domestic cats. And I've heard somebody at another conference I was at last weekend reckoned that they had caught an 8 kilo feral cat. So yeah, it's I do think they're bigger.
Frightening. Thanks very much for that. Oh, shit.
So we'll start with Anne in order of the talks. So Anne, you had a question from Doug, which was, can you confirm when you analyse survival versus temperature in absence of predator control that you are not accounting for predator density in models, i.e. we really should expect a relationship due to higher rat densities at a higher temperature?
Yeah, basically, actually, initially, what I hoped I could get out of those vital rate data was much more density impact function. So I would have loved to actually have, even if it's not predator density, some form of even just, some index of predators. But basically, no, I couldn't account for predator density. One reason I think why maybe that relationship is also not as strong as we could have expected is that those speech systems are eruptive, and it's not a perfect experiment. So we could expect to have some nest monitoring studies happening in essentially really shitty years in terms of bird nests, because the predators are through the roof in those eruptive systems. One of the things, one of the problems with those predator indices is, and hopefully maybe we hear from Tristan a little bit how that will change in the future, is that there were some studies that at least monitored rat tracking, but again, some of the really early studies didn't, from sort of early 90s or so. So it's basically, I think, from your work onwards where it was done much more consistently. But for possums, there's all sorts of things reported from sort of leak trapping, catch trap index per 100 nights, wax tags, true cards, different spacing, different survey lengths. So it's really hard to then compare cross studies. And then obviously for stoats, I don't think we've got the perfect in the sea yet either. So sorry, the short answer is I can confirm that I didn't account for that.
Thanks, Anne. There's a lot of questions, so we might just move on to Mania, but we'll be answering all the unanswered sessions later on, so don't worry, we definitely will get to these questions at some point. So Mania, you had a question from Graham Lowe, who commented that he loved your delve into the past and the scholarship. Do you have any comment on the potential of losing and then relearning streetwiseness of sanctuary escapees?
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you, Graham, for that question. Yeah, so there's actually been a lot of work done on this orokonui population before my time, with another master's student supervised by the late Ian Jamieson, looking at these anti-predator behaviours. And basically what they found out was, there's a huge difference in how the kakaruwai respond to different kinds of predators. So to avian predators is one thing, they knew to be afraid, but towards mustelids, first of all, towards rats, the ones inside the eco sanctuary didn't display any anti-predator behaviors at all. They didn't know how to be afraid. But interestingly, with the stoats, they actually did. There had been a recent stoat incursion a few years prior to this study. So, so translocated birds, they do lose these anti-predator behaviors, but it is possible for them to gain it back. It does take some time. A couple of years was the estimate from this study, but I think it's definitely something that needs more work in terms of how to actually train them to be afraid again. But yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mania. We'll move on to a question for Zoe. Zoe, John Innes asks, why do you think that tautauā like to be near a forest edge when their territories don't actually go there?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think for Taranaki, just from observations and stuff, I think potentially a food availability aspect. there's a little bit too much light on the edges, and then when you get in deeper, there's a lot more leaf litter and a lot more invertebrates for where their territories are. But they, for some reason, like to have that edge nearby, whether it's to do with being able to move around an edge or something. But yeah, but I'm not 100% sure why they like being near an edge but not quite on the edge. Yeah.
Who knows what goes on in their tiny brain. Kevin, we've got a question for you from Nathan Whitmore. Kevin, how do you estimate the intrinsic rate of increase given that the growth rate appears to be dynamic with evidence of carrying capacity at some site?
Yeah, I've been reading that question for a while and thinking about it quite a bit. There was a lower part down, Nathan, where I think you asked if we use Rmax, which was actually true. And for the more technical explanation in terms of the modelling, I'm probably not the best person, so I'm actually going to defer to Doug, whom I also had a quick chat about this as well, who will respond to that.
Thanks, Nathan. So I think you probably, can you hear me?
Oh, you're a little bit hard to hear. Sorry, Doug.
Sorry, that should be better.
Much better.
All right. Yeah, so those models all have got a Ricker function built into them. So the log of the growth rate basically changes as a function of the current density. And I think you're absolutely, I assume you're referring to the graphs Kev showed near the end where there was a rate of increase for each site. And you're exactly right that those would be Rmaxes.
Thanks, Doug and Kev. Cara, moving along a similar theme, I guess. We've got a question from Jim O'Malley, who said that they're planning a North Island rifleman translocation, and how does this Bayesian modelling approach help them? Oh, you're just on mute.
Sorry, that would depend on what prior information is available for Te Punamu. I am not sure on that, but you can use data from other species in some examples and combine that in the Bayesian methods. For example, I think a turkey translocation to an unfenced sanctuary used Totawai vital rates under rat tracking, and use that to work out a relationship between rat tracking, but Doug might have more to add on how that can work.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it pretty well. With Te Punamu, there might be enough prior data that probably could be used to construct a model. But this idea of then moving to new species where where you don't have much data, but you're trying to infer it from others, that we haven't really kind of got there yet. I think it's a new big problem to try and take on by somebody.
I think we've got time for one more question, so we'll go for Manaya. You've got a question from Bruce Reed. Outside Orokonui Reserve, what pest control methods were practiced and continued to be practiced? And he did also ask whether trail cameras are deployed to establish what predators persist outside the sanctuary as well.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so in the figure that I was showing of my study sites, there was kind of 2 rings of predator control intensity around the eco sanctuary. So predator-free Dunedin and the Halo project, at the moment, they're just focusing on trap lines, mostly for possums and for mustelids. They aren't really addressing rats at the moment, even though they're much more likely than possums to be the main nest predators for the kakaruwai. But yeah, at the moment, it's just trap lines for possums and mustelids, but at a quite intense level. They've got contractors out there, but there's also a lot of community backyard trapping. In terms of trail cameras, I'm not aware of any out there at the moment. I know that the Otago branch of Birds New Zealand has been running some nest outcome monitoring on some private land immediately adjacent to the eco sanctuary. My survey sites didn't include this, But yeah, Georgina Pickrell, who's one of the co-authors for she designed the original Halo project survey. She's been in charge of that. That project has just wrapped up now, but they had a few trail cameras set up to varying degrees of success on nests. A lot of them weren't actually able to capture what it was exactly that caused the nest predation. But it's seeming like stoats and rats are the biggest suspects.
Thanks, Mania. We're at the end of the question time, so I'm going to pass on to Josh, who is chairing this next session. But thank you so much to all of our speakers. Those were fascinating talks.
Jamie McCauley says to Anne, great talk, Anne. Thinking of Joe's dietary rat niche results from yesterday and your comment about are rat bounces that bad, I'm interested in how these models could allow for the behavioral component of predation risk and how that may vary with space and time.
Oh, well, yeah, that's definitely a really interesting question. And I almost think maybe Dean might be able to comment a bit more on that side of things, of how that could, I guess almost in the engine room of the model, how that could look like, of accounting for those, behavioral adaptations. I guess one thing to note is that Joe's study was in a beach system rather than in a permacarp broadleaf system, but overall, I guess it'd be still really interesting of how we could kind of incorporate those behavioral aspects.
Susan, can you repeat the question? I was a little distracted.
So Jamie says, I'm interested in how these models could allow for the behavioral component of predation risk and how that may vary with space and time. So
behavioral component. We're basically relating the presence of a prey species with the presence of with the number of predators around that area, and that gives us a probability of, or a reduction on, or a probability of a predation event on that individual. We're not really modeling behavior other than sort of building home range size into the model, sort of indirectly. So we're not really modeling behavior per se. So not sure we can get at that. Might have to talk to Jamie about specifically the behaviors he's talking about. We do have prey switch in there, which is a predator behavior change. Yeah. And for the species, we do have, it's an age class system. So the different age classes have different susceptibility to predation, which is a behavioral thing as well.
Thank you, Dean. I mean, I've got a couple of questions here that might want Josh on the line for. Are you still around, Josh? And they were posed to Dean, but I think we may need some of your input here. So Bruce McKinley asks, as not all huts in the zone of the model are dock huts, so this is obviously around the Kia model, high country run huts and white baitas huts, does the number of huts change the parameters of the lead model?
Yeah, maybe I'll address that. I mean, the more information we have about those point sources, the better. It doesn't change the parameters per se. It just changes the data. It changes that risk map, and makes it worse for the Kia. So it'd be great to have that in the model. It would make it worse for Kia though. In the model.
Thank you. And a sort of follow-up or related question from Cara Goddard. I know there is a project to change lead sources, snails made lead to non-lead. Any idea how that program's going? And I think that's a question for Josh.
Yes. That program's going well. We just heard talk about that at the Kia Summit and over the weekend. Lots of work gone in to remove lead head nails and flashings on many buildings throughout Kia habitat. There's going to be there's still a lot to go, but it's all being well prioritised to the riskiest areas and going really well. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Josh. And this is another one that might come your way, Josh. Bruce Reed asks, since the more rats there are, the more stoats there are, why don't we use a rat-based lure instead of, or as well as, dried rabbit when using trapping systems to protect Kia?
Oh, sorry, was that one coming through to me?
Yes,
we were having little sound issues there.
Yes, sorry, that's okay. Yeah. I think that was one for you to think about rather than Dean.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, rat-based lures. Well, there's a lot of work going on lures around the place. I think we should be using all sorts of different lures, and rat-based lures should be on the list if we can get one.
Cool, thank you. So there's quite a few comments, Dean, about the Kia model not actually having its parameters right, and definitely not actually showing up the east-west split. So from Christine and Josh, and why we think that is. And I think that's probably something we will leave for another discussion rather than this afternoon. Nathan Whitmore asks you though, Dean, with regard to the near extinction on the West Coast, is this an artifact of the model? So does your model allow the existence of decimal Kias, which he thinks could be causing this?
Sorry, what are decimal Kias?
Oh, I imagine that Kias less than 1.1 of a Kia might allow you to have persistence.
Very low densities, yes, because we're yes.
And right, so that would be something to tidy up in the model or to change.
Well, it allows for extinction as well. So I mean, we can have low density. I don't see why we need to tidy that up.
Okay. So Debs Martin asks, Josh or Graham, no mention of the remove and protect model, aka zip approach, as a viable way forward in all your deliberations. Why is this? And this may be something that's better targeted to Tristan next, but in the next 60 seconds, I wonder if you have any reflections, Josh. Or Dean, actually, in the model.
Oh, because it wasn't in scope of the birds in the bush, more birds in the bush MBIE program, really, was it? Susan?
Well, it's just in your talks. It wasn't really mentioned. And Dean, you haven't put it into the model? Is that something that could be done?
Yeah. Yep. It could be done. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the whole program is still a work in progress. So everything from that program is kind of hot off the press, and it's you know, as a suppression model, it's kind of you know, difficult to parameterize, I think, at this point, but yeah, it could be something that we can do.
Cool. Right. Well, thank you very much. I think we'll bring the question time to an end.